Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 6 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-305 Microsoft Certified Solutions Architect Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 6. Now consider question number 230. We are now working with SQL Managed Instance. Scenario: two databases being migrated depend on SQL Server agent jobs and cross-database transactions. The target must be a managed service and provide zone-resilient synchronous replicas for critical OLTP processing. Complete the migration target design. The first statement reads, choose the blank as the database platform. Choose between a single Azure SQL database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, or an Azure SQL Database Elastic Pool. The second statement reads, choose the blank tier. Choose between hyperscale, business critical, or general purpose. The correct value for statement 1 is Azure SQL Managed Instance. The platform satisfies instance scoped compatibility. The correct value for statement 2 is business critical. The tier addresses local replica performance and zone resilience. Keep this examination point in mind. Compatibility requirements often determine the Azure SQL product before performance and resiliency determine the tier. Next, question number 231. Scenario: a company has one production ADDS forest and will synchronize its users to Microsoft Entra ID for Azure and Microsoft 365. All users must keep their existing UPN suffix, and one conditional access policy will require MFA for all Azure Management Administrators. A separate research forest remains entirely on-premises and is not synchronized. Complete the minimum identity design. Statement 1. Create the blank Microsoft Entra tenant. The options for this statement are 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Statement 2. Add the blank custom domain to the tenant. The options for this statement are 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Statement 3. Create the blank conditional access policy for the stated MFA requirement. The options for this statement are 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. For statement 1, select 1. The production cloud identity model requires one tenant. For statement 2, select 1. One production UPN suffix requires one verified custom domain. For statement 3, select 1. One policy can target the administrator population and Azure Management Access. Exam tip: count tenants, domains, and policies from distinct identity boundaries and distinct enforcement conditions, not from the number of offices. Question number 232. This one is marked hard. Eliminate the options systematically. Consider this scenario. A regulated application must run on Azure dedicated hosts in 3 availability zones. Each zone needs an independent host placement boundary and its own VM scale set, so that zone-specific maintenance and failures do not affect the other zones. Complete the minimum zonal compute design. For the first statement, deploy the blank host groups. Select from 1, 2, 3, or 6. For the second statement, deploy the blank virtual machine scale sets. Select from 0, 1, or 3. Statement 1 should be completed with 3. Each zonal host group represents one required zone. Statement 2 should be completed with 3. One scale set per zone provides explicit zonal placement and independent scaling. Remember this distinction for the exam. Dedicated host groups are zonal placement constructs. Count them from the required zones and isolation boundaries. We will now analyze question number 233. Begin by examining the scenario. An application runs in 3 Azure regions. One traffic manager profile provides global DNS routing, and each region uses a separate application gateway for regional layer, 7 routing, and WAF. Complete the minimum service instance count. Review statement 1. The minimum number of traffic manager profiles is the blank. The available choices are 1, 2, 3, or 6. Review statement 2. The minimum number of application gateway deployments is the blank. The available choices are 1, 2, 3, or 6. The answer to the first statement is 1. One global DNS profile can route among all regional endpoints. The answer to the second statement is 3. A regional gateway must be deployed separately in every region that serves traffic. Global routing services can be shared across regions. Regional gateways must be counted per deployed region. Question number 234. This question moves us into Azure policy design. A compliance team has an ARM template that enables transparent data encryption on non-compliant Azure SQL databases. Azure policy must deploy the required configuration and remediate existing databases. Arrange the 3 implementation actions in the correct order. The sequence must use these items. Item 1. Invoke a remediation task. Item 2. Create the Azure policy assignment. Item 3. Create a policy definition that uses the deploy if not exists effect. The completed sequence is: the first item is create a policy definition that uses the deploy if not exists effect. The second item is create the Azure policy assignment. The third item is invoke a remediation task. The deploy if not exists definition describes the desired deployment. Assigning it establishes scope and managed identity authorization. A remediation task then evaluates and corrects existing non-compliant resources. A useful examination rule is this: define the policy first, assign it with the required identity and roles, then remediate existing resources. Proceed to question number 235. Review the situation. A legacy vacation request application has its own username and password store and cannot use SAML, OpenID Connect, or header-based federation. The organization wants users to launch it from My Apps with single sign-on. Which enterprise application SSO mode should you configure? Review the options. Option A, header-based SSO. Option B, SAML SSO. Option C, password-based SSO. Option D, OpenID Connect. The best answer is option C, password-based SSO. The key reason is password-based SSO securely stores and replays the application's existing credentials for applications that cannot integrate with an identity provider. A. Header-based SSO requires an application or proxy that accepts trusted identity headers. B. SAML requires federation support in the application. D. OpenID Connect requires modern identity provider integration. The key takeaway is password-based SSO is a compatibility bridge for legacy apps that cannot support federation protocols. The next item is question number 236. Treat this as a medium question. An architect needs to deploy a collection of Azure resources as a single unified entity. The solution must support tracking the lifecycle of these resources together and provide the ability to automatically delete the resources if the collection is deleted. Which deployment feature should provide this capability? Available choices. Choice A, Azure Deployment Stacks. Choice B, standalone ARM templates. Choice C, Azure Policy. Choice D, Azure Resource Mover. The correct answer is option A, Azure Deployment Stacks. This is correct because Azure Deployment Stacks allow you to manage a group of Azure resources as a single logical unit. When a stack is deleted or updated, it can automatically clean up or detach the resources that are no longer part of the stack. The remaining options are incorrect because B, standalone ARM templates are fire and forget. They deploy resources but do not maintain a unified lifecycle or automatic cleanup of previously deployed resources. C, Azure Policy enforces compliance and governance rules, but is not a resource lifecycle grouping mechanism. D, Azure Resource Mover is used to relocate resources between regions, not to manage their lifecycle as a unified stack. Keep this examination point in mind. Use Azure Deployment Stacks to manage the lifecycle, updates, and cleanup of a related collection of deployed resources. Proceed to question number 237. Review the situation. A data processing application needs scalable blob storage with real directory semantics and directory-level ACLs for separate business teams. Standard performance is sufficient. Complete the storage design. Statement 1. Use of the blank account. The available choices are Premium Page Blob, Premium File Share, or Standard General Purpose v2. Statement 2. Enable the blank. The available choices are NFS 3.0, large file shares, or hierarchical namespace. The correct value for Statement 1 is Standard General Purpose v2. GPv2 supports the required blob and ADLS Generation 2 capabilities at standard cost. The correct value for Statement 2 is Hierarchical Namespace. Hierarchical namespace enables directories and fine-grained ACLs. Exam tip: choose hierarchical namespace when blob data requires directories, atomic directory operations, or POSIX ACLs. Review question number 238. Carefully. Review the scenario carefully. A storage account must be reachable from an application network through a private IP address. Public network access to the storage service must be disabled, and traffic must remain on the Microsoft backbone. Which connectivity option should you recommend? Compare the following options. Option A is ExpressRoute Microsoft peering only. Option B is ExpressRoute Azure Public Peering. Option C is a service endpoint with a service endpoint policy. Option D is a private endpoint. The appropriate choice is option D, a private endpoint. Here is the technical justification. A private endpoint places a private IP for the storage service in the virtual network and supports disabling the public endpoint while traffic remains on the Microsoft backbone. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. A. Microsoft peering reaches Azure Public Service endpoints and does not create a private IP in the VNet. B. Azure Public Peering is not the current design for private pass access. C. A service endpoint secures traffic from a subnet, but the storage service still uses its public endpoint address. Remember this distinction for the exam. Use private link when the pass service must be exposed through a private IP and public access must be disabled. The next item is question number 239. A hybrid identity deployment uses Microsoft Interconnect Sync. The IT support distribution group must receive health notifications when synchronization components experience problems. Which service should be included in the recommendation? The options are: Choice A, SendGrid with advanced reporting. Choice B, an Azure Monitor Action Group. Choice C, Azure Network Watcher. Choice D, Microsoft Interconnect Health. The required response is option D, Microsoft Interconnect Health. The reasoning is as follows. Microsoft Interconnect Health monitors synchronization and related hybrid identity components and supports alerting designated recipients about health issues. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A. SendGrid sends application email but does not monitor directory synchronization health. B. An action group can deliver Azure Monitor alerts but does not by itself provide Interconnect Health telemetry. C. Network Watcher monitors Azure networking rather than identity synchronization. Use Interconnect Health for hybrid identity synchronization health and operational alerts. Now consider question number 240. Scenario. A branch office file server must cache an Azure-hosted SMB share locally. Changes made in either location must synchronize through the cloud namespace, and users should continue using familiar file paths. Match the service to the location where it must be deployed. Begin with the following source items. Source 1. Cloud file service in the Azure subscription. Source 2. Synchronization agent and endpoint on the on-premises Windows server. The target positions are: Destination A, Azure Files. Destination B, Azure Files Sync. Destination C, Azure Data Box Gateway. Destination D, Azure Blob Storage. The first mapping connects Cloud File Service in the Azure subscription to Azure Files. The second mapping connects Synchronization Agent and endpoint on the on-premises Windows server to Azure Files Sync. The requirement is satisfied because Azure Files provides the cloud SMB share and namespace. Azure File Sync is installed on Windows Server to synchronize and optionally cache the Azure file share on premises. A useful examination rule is this. Azure Files is the cloud share. Azure File Sync extends that share to Windows servers with synchronization and cloud tiering. Let us work through question number 241. Consider the following scenario. A logistics platform runs identical application instances across 3 availability zones. The application stores shared binary documents that must remain available after a zone failure and must also be replicated to a secondary Azure region. The workload does not require a NoSQL database. Which data service should the architect deploy for the shared application data? Review each available choice. Choice A, an Azure Cosmos DB account configured for multi-region rights. Choice B, an Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2 account using locally redundant storage. Choice C, a standard general-purpose V2 storage account using GeoZone redundant storage. In this case, select option C, a standard general-purpose V2 storage account using GeoZone redundant storage. A GZRS storage account synchronously distributes data across availability zones in the primary region and asynchronously replicates it to a secondary region, meeting both zonal and regional durability requirements. The alternatives can be eliminated because A, Cosmos DB multi-region rights is unnecessary for shared object storage and adds database cost and complexity. B, locally redundant storage does not protect against a zone or regional outage. The key takeaway is use GZRS when object data needs both zone resilience in the primary region and asynchronous protection in a second region. Question number 242. Now, scenario. A software company must restrict new app service and Azure SQL resources to approved Azure regions. An administrator proposes creating one resource group per region and applying cannot delete locks to those resource groups. Does the proposed design enforce the allowed region requirement? Choices. Option A, yes. Option B, no. In this case, select option B, no. The key reason is resource locks protect resources from deletion or modification, but do not restrict the regions in which new resources can be deployed. Azure policy is required for location enforcement. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A, resource group organization and locks do not evaluate or deny a resource's location. Keep this examination point in mind. Use Azure policy for compliance enforcement. Resource locks protect management operations, but do not validate configuration. Let us examine question number 243. Let us first review the situation. A regulated company deploys app service applications and their Azure SQL databases together. Deployments must be limited to an approved region list, and each workload's resources must use the same region. Would an Azure policy initiative containing allowed location policies and a custom colocation policy meet the requirement? Choose from the following options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The best answer is option A. Yes. This is correct because an initiative can group policy definitions that deny unapproved regions and audit or deny resources whose location does not match the required workload or resource group location. B. Azure policy initiatives are specifically designed to combine and assign multiple compliance controls at a common scope. Exam tip. Use initiatives when one governance outcome requires several related Azure policy definitions. We will now analyze question number 244. Consider the following scenario. A public web application is deployed in 3 Azure regions. The entry service must distribute HTTP requests across healthy regional deployments, provide regional failover, and enforce request rate limits. Would a single Azure application gateway satisfy all requirements? Now examine the possible answers. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The correct answer is option B, no. Here is the technical justification. Application Gateway is a regional Layer 7 load balancer. Even though WAF custom rules can rate limit traffic, one gateway cannot globally balance and fail over across multiple Azure regions. The remaining options are incorrect because A, a global service such as Azure Front Door is required to route across regions. Remember this distinction for the exam. Application Gateway is regional. Azure Front Door is the usual global HTTP entry point. Question number 245. The focus now shifts to Azure policy design. Consider this scenario. A healthcare company must prevent app service resources from being deployed outside approved Azure regions. The security team proposes using the Regulatory Compliance Dashboard in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Does the proposed solution enforce the deployment restriction? Option A, yes. Option B, no. The appropriate choice is option B, no. The reasoning is as follows. The compliance dashboard reports posture against standards, but does not deny resource deployments. An Azure policy assignment with an allowed locations control is required. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. A. Defender for Cloud can surface noncompliance, but it is not a substitute for a deny policy that enforces resource location. Distinguish compliance reporting from preventive enforcement. The next item is question number 246. Consider this scenario. A financial services company will use a customer-managed TD protector for an Azure SQL-managed instance. The key must use the strongest RSA key size supported by Azure SQL TD. Which key should the security architect create in Azure Key Vault? Review the options. Option A, an RSA 2048-bit key. Option B, an AES 256-bit key. Option C, an RSA 4096-bit key. Option D, an RSA 3072-bit key. The required response is option D, an RSA 3072-bit key. The requirement is satisfied because Azure SQL TD supports asymmetric RSA or RSAHSM protectors with 2048-bit and 3072-bit sizes. RSA 3072 is the strongest supported option listed. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A, RSA 2048 is supported but provides a shorter key than RSA 3072. B, a symmetric AES key is not a supported customer-managed TD protector for this scenario. C, RSA 4096 is not supported as an Azure SQL TD protector. A useful examination rule is this. For Azure SQL TD with customer-managed keys, validate both the key type and the supported key size. Review question number 247. Carefully. We are moving to identity governance. Let us first review the situation. A single-tenant app service application is owned by the research division of one company. A partner company's employees need governed access while continuing to use their home tenant credentials. Access must be requestable, approved, reviewed, and removed when no longer needed. Which Microsoft Entra capability should govern the partner users? Compare the following options. Choice A, Microsoft Entra Join. Choice B, Entitlement Management with an Access Package. Choice C, Pass-Through Authentication. Choice D, Privileged Identity Management Role Assignments. The required response is option B, Entitlement Management with an Access Package. Entitlement Management can invite B2B users, package application access, require approval, set expiration, and perform recurring reviews while users authenticate with their existing tenant identities. The alternatives can be eliminated because A, Device Join does not onboard external users to an application. C, Pass-Through Authentication validates identities against an on-premises directory and does not provide cross-tenant application governance. DPIM governs privileged role activation rather than ordinary external application access. The key takeaway is use entitlement management when external collaboration needs request, approval, expiration, and review workflows. Let us work through question number 248. Begin by examining the scenario. A project portal is configured as a single-tenant enterprise application. Contractors from another Microsoft Entra tenant must receive time-limited access after sponsor approval and must be removed automatically when the project ends. Which solution should the architect recommend? Review each available choice. Option A is Microsoft Entra Identity Protection. Option B is Microsoft Entra Entitlement Management. Option C is Microsoft Entra Join. Option D is Privileged Identity Management. In this case, select option B, Microsoft Entra Entitlement Management. The key reason is entitlement management access packages support B2B onboarding, approval, assignment expiration, and lifecycle governance for external users. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Identity protection detects and remediates identity risk, but does not provision project access. C. Intra-join manages devices, not guest application assignments. DPIM is designed for privileged roles and groups, not general partner onboarding. Keep this examination point in mind. External access lifecycle requirements usually point to entitlement management and access packages. Let us examine question number 249. Review the scenario carefully. An Azure function must query the Azure activity log in its own subscription. The application must not store credentials, and identity administration should be minimized. Which authentication method should be used? Choose from the following options. Choice A, a manually created enterprise application with a client secret. Choice B, a system-assigned managed identity. Choice C, a shared access signature. Choice D, an application registration with a certificate. The best answer is option B, a system-assigned managed identity. This is correct because a system-assigned managed identity is created and managed with the function app, obtains Microsoft Intra tokens without stored credentials, and can receive the required Azure or BAC role. A. A client secret requires storage and rotation. C. SAS is a storage authorization mechanism and cannot authenticate to Azure Resource Manager Activity Log APIs. D. A certificate-based application registration still requires certificate lifecycle management. Exam tip. For Azure-hosted code that accesses Azure Control Plane APIs, prefer a managed identity plus least privilege or BAC. Let us examine question number 250. Next, we enter the topic of authorization design. Let us first review the situation. A company is transferring selected Azure subscriptions from one Microsoft Intra tenant to another. One administrator must be able to change a subscriptions directory. A second administrator must be able to recover access in the destination tenant when no principal retains subscription permissions. Complete the least privilege role design. For the first statement, to change the directory associated with a subscription, assign the administrator the blank role at the subscription scope. The options for this statement are owner, contributor, or reader. For the second statement, to recover access after the transfer, make the second administrator of the blank who can enable access management for Azure resources. The options for this statement are global administrator, billing reader, or security reader. The answer to the first statement is owner. Changing a subscription directory requires subscription-level ownership. The answer to the second statement is global administrator. A global administrator can elevate access to obtain user access administrator permissions at the tenant root and then restore subscription access. Remember this distinction for the exam. Directory transfer and post-transfer access recovery use different privilege paths, subscription owner and tenant global administrator elevation. Proceed to question number 251. Review the situation. A legal document portal is registered as a single tenant application. External counsel from a partner tenant need controlled access using their existing identities, with approvals and periodic access certification. Which capabilities should be included? The options are: Choice A, a conditional access policy only. Choice B, Microsoft Intra Entitlement Management. Choice C, Microsoft Intra Provisioning Service only. Choice D, Microsoft Intra Identity Protection. The correct answer is option B, Microsoft Intra Entitlement Management. Here is the technical justification. Entitlement management combines B2B collaboration with access packages, approvals, expiration, and access reviews for external users. The remaining options are incorrect because A, conditional access controls sign-in conditions, but does not onboard or govern the access lifecycle. C, provisioning alone does not provide the requested approval and review lifecycle. D, identity protection addresses risky identities and sign-ins, not partner access packages. Use conditional access to control sign-in. Use entitlement management to govern who receives and retains access. Now consider question number 252. Next, we enter the topic of Azure SQL design. Scenario: a 300 GB transactional database uses the DTU purchasing model. It requires synchronous local replicas, automatic failover without committed data loss, and resilience to an availability zone outage. The application does not need hyperscale storage or independent compute and storage scaling. Which deployment option should minimize cost while meeting the requirements? Available choices. Option A, Azure SQL Database Hyperscale with zone redundancy. Option B, Azure SQL Database Premium with zone redundancy. Option C, Azure SQL Database Basic. Option D, Azure SQL Database Standard. The appropriate choice is Option B, Azure SQL Database Premium with zone redundancy. The reasoning is as follows. Premium provides multiple synchronous replicas and can place them across availability zones at no additional zone redundancy charge. It meets the stated DTU and moderate-size workload requirements without the extra hyperscale architecture. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. A. Hyperscale can be zone redundant, but is unnecessary when the workload does not need its scale characteristics. C. Basic does not provide the required zone-redundant high-availability architecture. D. Standard does not provide the premium replica architecture required by the scenario. A useful examination rule is this. When multiple tiers meet availability needs, use workload scale and purchasing model constraints to choose the least costly sufficient tier. Review question number 253. Carefully. Consider the following scenario. An order platform has independent services for payment, inventory, invoicing, and shipment. The services must exchange durable XML command messages asynchronously and support retries and dead lettering. Which Azure service should connect the components? Now examine the possible answers. Option A is Azure Service Bus. Option B is Azure Data Lake Storage. Option C is Azure Traffic Manager. Option D is Azure Blob Storage. The required response is Option A, Azure Service Bus. The requirement is satisfied because Azure Service Bus provides durable enterprise messaging, queues or topics, delivery guarantees, retries, and dead lettering while treating XML as message payload. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because B, Data Lake Storage is an analytical object store, not a transactional message broker. C, Traffic Manager provides DNS-based endpoint routing. D, Blob Storage persists objects but does not provide broker semantics. The key takeaway is choose Service Bus for durable business commands and workflows. Message format alone does not determine the service. We will now analyze question number 254. Begin by examining the scenario. A SaaS provider needs one fully managed Azure SQL database with synchronous replicas, automatic no data loss local failover, and availability zone resilience. The application has no instance-scoped SQL server compatibility requirements. Which option provides the required architecture with the least unnecessary platform cost? Now examine the possible answers. Choice A, Azure SQL Database Basic. Choice B, Azure SQL Managed Instance General Purpose. Choice C, Azure SQL Database Business Critical with zone redundancy. Choice D, Azure SQL Managed Instance Business Critical with zone redundancy. The correct answer is Option C, Azure SQL Database Business Critical with zone redundancy. A zone-redundant business-critical database uses synchronous replicas across zones and avoids the broader instance compatibility and baseline cost of managed instance. The alternatives can be eliminated because A, Basic lacks the required replica and zone-resilient architecture. B, General-purpose managed instance is not the lowest cost route to the specified synchronous business-critical architecture. D, Managed instance business-critical meets availability needs, but adds instance-level compatibility and costs that are not required. Keep this examination point in mind. Do not choose managed instance unless instance-level SQL compatibility is a stated requirement. Question number 255. An AKS cluster has a supported Windows Server node pool. The platform must automatically add Windows Worker nodes when pods remain pending because the node pool lacks capacity. Which AKS scaling feature should be configured? Choice A, Horizontal Pod Autoscaler. Choice B, Virtual Nodes. Choice C, A Kubernetes version upgrade only. Choice D, cluster autoscaler. In this case, select option D, cluster autoscaler. The key reason is the cluster autoscaler monitors unschedulable pods and increases or decreases the VM count in supported AKS node pools, including Windows node pools. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. HPA changes pod replica counts, but does not provision VM nodes. B. The managed virtual nodes add-on supports Linux pods and nodes, not Windows node pools. C. A version upgrade does not implement capacity autoscaling. Exam tip. HPA scales pods. Cluster autoscaler scales nodes. Many production designs use both. The next key item is question number 256. This question moves us into messaging architecture. This scenario establishes the key requirement. A travel booking workflow has separate services for reservations, payment, loyalty points, and ticketing. Each service must exchange durable XML messages without requiring synchronous availability of the receiver. Which Azure service should be used? Focus on the distinction between these options. Option A, Azure Service Fabric. Option B, Azure Data Lake Storage. Option C, Azure Service Bus. Option D, Azure Application Gateway. The best answer is option C, Azure Service Bus. This is correct because Service Bus decouples services through durable queues or topics and supports enterprise messaging features independent of the XML payload. A. Service Fabric hosts distributed applications, but is not the messaging broker requested. B. Data Lake Storage is for analytical files. D. Application Gateway routes HTTP traffic and does not provide durable asynchronous messaging. Remember this distinction for the exam. Select a broker based on delivery and workflow semantics, not whether the payload is XML or JSON. Evaluate question number 257. Against every requirement. Identify the decisive requirement in this scenario. A multinational company has branch offices and remote users in North America and Europe. Each office connects to its nearest Azure region through ExpressRoute. Remote user VPN clients should connect to a nearby regional hub, and networks require transitive routing. Internet and private traffic must be inspectable with FQDN-based firewall rules. Which architecture should be recommended? Eliminate any option that fails a requirement. Consider option A, Azure Virtual WAN standard with secured virtual hubs. Consider option B, global VNet peering with application security groups. Consider option C, independent VNet gateways with network security groups. Consider option D, Azure Route Server with Azure Network Function Manager. The appropriate choice is option A, Azure Virtual WAN standard with secured virtual hubs. Here is the technical justification. Standard Virtual WAN integrates ExpressRoute, site-to-site and point-to-site connectivity, transitive hub routing, and secured hubs with Azure Firewall for centralized FQDN filtering. The remaining options are incorrect because B, VNet peering is non-transitive and application security groups do not provide FQDN-based egress filtering. C, independent gateways increase administration and NSGS cannot filter general traffic by FQDN. D, Route Server exchanges routes with NVAs but does not provide the complete managed global connectivity and remote user architecture. Virtual WAN standard is the managed transit architecture when ExpressRoute, VPN, inter-hub routing, and secured hubs must work together. Now consider question number 258. Review the situation. A company is modernizing an OLTP database to a single Azure SQL database. It needs synchronous high-availability replicas distributed across availability zones and automatic local failover with no loss of committed transactions. Which deployment should be selected? The options are: Choice A, Azure SQL Database Business Critical with Zone Redundancy. Choice B, Azure SQL Managed Instance Business Critical. Choice C, Azure SQL Database Standard. Choice D, Azure SQL Managed Instance General Purpose. The correct answer is option A, Azure SQL Database Business Critical with Zone Redundancy. The reasoning is as follows. Zone Redundant Business Critical provides multiple synchronous replicas across zones for a single managed database without requiring managed instance. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. Managed instance is unnecessary because no instance-level compatibility requirement is stated. C. Standard lacks the required business-critical replica architecture. D. General-purpose managed instance does not provide the same local synchronous replica design. A useful examination rule is this. Match SQL deployment type to compatibility requirements before selecting the service tier. The next item is question number 259. Point-of-sale applications run in stores outside Azure and connect unattended to an Azure Databricks workspace. Authentication must not depend on employee accounts, and staff turnover must not require application credential changes. Which identity should represent the applications? Available choices. Option A. A managed identity assigned to each store server. Option B. A Microsoft Interest Service Principal using machine-to-machine OAuth. Option C. A personal access token owned by a Databricks user. The required response is option B. A Microsoft Interest Service Principal using machine-to-machine OAuth. The requirement is satisfied because a service principal provides a non-human identity for on-premises applications and supports centrally governed machine-to-machine OAuth authentication. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A. Azure managed identities are designed for supported Azure resources and are not directly assigned to ordinary on-premises servers. C. A user-owned PAT is tied to an individual lifecycle and creates manual credential management risk. The key takeaway is for unattended software outside Azure. Use a service principal. For supported Azure-hosted workloads, prefer managed identities. Let us work through question number 260. We are moving to data analytics design. Review the scenario carefully. An industrial IoT platform ingests approximately 50,000 timestamp telemetry records per second. The solution needs near real-time visualization and a scalable store that applications can query by device and time. Which two Azure services are independently suitable parts of the storage and query architecture? Select 2. Identify all valid responses. Review each available choice. Option A is Azure Table Storage. Option B is Azure Event Grid. Option C is Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL. Option D is Azure Data Explorer. Select Option C, Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL, and Option D, Azure Data Explorer. Cosmos DB for NoSQL can provide globally distributed low-latency operational queries, while Azure Data Explorer is optimized for high-volume streaming telemetry, time series analytics, and near real-time dashboards. The alternatives can be eliminated because A. Table storage can store key-value entities but is not the strongest fit for the stated ingestion, analytics, and visualization scale. B. Event Grid routes discrete events and is not a telemetry data store or analytical query engine. Keep this examination point in mind. For IoT, separate ingestion from operational serving and time series analytics. Azure Data Explorer is the current analytics choice. Let us work through question number 261. Let us first review the situation. A publisher is migrating a SQL Server database to Azure. It needs up to 4 readable geo-secondary databases, asynchronous automatic replication, and application-controlled failover within a 15-minute RTO. Complete the relational deployment and replication design. The first statement reads, host the database by using the blank. Choose between Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, or Azure SQL Database Hyperscale only. The second statement reads, replicate the database by using the blank. Choose between active geo-replication, auto failover groups, or zone redundant deployment. For statement 1, select Azure SQL Database. Azure SQL Database supports multiple readable geo-secondary databases. For statement 2, select Active Geo-Replication. Active Geo-Replication allows application-managed failover among multiple readable secondaries. Exam tip. Use Active Geo-Replication when multiple readable geo-secondaries are required. Use failover groups for listener-based group failover. Let us examine question number 262. Begin by examining the scenario. 2 on-premises Windows SQL Server instances host an availability group. A separate SQL Server instance on an Azure Linux VM will become the migration target. The database must be moved with minimal downtime while preserving the existing availability group during synchronization. Complete the migration design. Review Statement 1. Prepare the Azure target by the blank. Select from creating a separate availability group on the Azure VM, adding the Azure VM directly as a replica of the Windows availability group, or upgrading the source instances only. Review Statement 2. Synchronize and cut over by using the blank. Select from a distributed availability group, Azure Migrate Server Replication, or periodic full backups only. Statement 1 should be completed with creating a separate availability group on the Azure VM. A distributed availability group links 2 independent availability groups, so the Azure side needs its own availability group. Statement 2 should be completed with a distributed availability group. The distributed availability group continuously transfers database, changes, and supports a low downtime cutover across the separate clusters and operating systems. Remember this distinction for the exam. Distributed availability groups are useful for low downtime migrations between independent SQL Server availability groups. Review question number 263. Carefully. The focus now shifts to identity governance. Review the scenario carefully. A Microsoft Intra-Security group contains employees and guest users. Every member must attest quarterly that access is still required. A negative response or no response must automatically remove the member. Which capability should be configured? Compare the following options. Option A is Microsoft Intra-Identity Protection. Option B is Dynamic Group Membership. Option C is a Recurring Access Review. Option D is Privileged Identity Management. The best answer is Option C, a Recurring Access Review. The key reason is a Recurring Access Review can ask members to self-review and apply results automatically, including removing denied users and users who do not respond. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Identity protection evaluates risk rather than business need for group membership. B. Dynamic membership is rule-based and does not collect attestations. DPIM manages privileged activation and eligibility, not general membership certification. Use access reviews for periodic attestation and automatic removal of stale group or application access. We will now analyze question number 264. Consider the following scenario. A cost-conscious SQL Server VM requires accelerated networking based on SRIOV and a single managed data disk configurable for 15,000 IOPS. GPU acceleration is not required. Complete the VM and disk recommendation. Review Statement 1. Use of the blank virtual machine series. Choose between DSV5, NCAS_T4_V3, or NVATS, a 10v5. Review Statement 2. Use of the blank managed disk. Choose between Premium SSD v2, Standard SSD, or Standard HDD. The answer to the first statement is DSV5. DSV5 supports accelerated networking and avoids the cost of GPU Focus series. The answer to the second statement is Premium SSD v2. Premium SSD v2 allows independent IOPS configuration well beyond 15,000 IOPS on supported virtual machines. A useful examination rule is this. For database virtual machines, validate VM-level disk bandwidth and IOPS limits in addition to the managed disk's own limits. Review question number 265. Carefully. Take extra care here because this is a hard question. Consider the following scenario. A payroll application stores PI in Azure SQL database. The database must automatically scale compute during monthly processing, minimize idle compute cost, remain available after a zone failure in a supported region, and prevent database administrators without key access from seeing selected PI columns. Complete the database design. Statement 1. Use the blank compute architecture. The options for this statement are general-purpose serverless with zone redundancy, business-critical provision compute without zone redundancy, or hyperscale provision compute without high availability replicas. Statement 2. Protect the PII columns with the blank. The options for this statement are always encrypted, transparent data encryption, or data classification labels only. Statement 1 should be completed with general-purpose serverless with zone redundancy. General-purpose serverless scales compute and can pause for suitable intermittent workloads. Zone redundancy protects against a zone failure where supported. Statement 2 should be completed with always encrypted. Always encrypted protects selected columns from the database engine and administrators who do not possess the client-side keys. The key takeaway is TD protects files at rest. Always encrypted protects selected values from the database engine. We will now analyze question number 266. Let us first review the situation. Two ASP.NET Core applications run on many virtual machines. Users sign in with Microsoft Intro identities. One app reads the signed-in user's calendar and the other updates that user's calendar. The apps must act only on behalf of the current user. Complete the authentication and authorization design. For the first statement, represent and authenticate each application by using the blank. The available choices are an application registration in Microsoft Intro ID, a system-assigned managed identity only, or a user-assigned managed identity only. For the second statement, request Microsoft Graph access by using the blank. The available choices are delegated permissions, application permissions, or Azure or BAC. The correct value for statement 1 is an application registration in Microsoft Intro ID. Application registrations define the OAuth/OIDC identity configuration and redirect flows for user sign-in. The correct value for statement 2 is delegated permissions. Delegated permissions let the app call Microsoft Graph within the signed-in user's context and consented scope. Keep this examination point in mind. Use delegated permissions for on behalf of user access. Use application permissions for daemon access without a user. Let us work through question number 267. Review the scenario carefully. A web application is currently registered for accounts in one Microsoft intratenant. The company wants users from a second intratenant to sign in directly without first creating individually governed guest assignments. What change should the application team make? Choose from the following options. Choice A. Join partner devices to the resource tenant. Choice B. Enable identity protection only. Choice C. Create a conditional access policy only. Choice D. Change the app registration to a multi-tenant supported account type and use the appropriate tenant-independent sign-in endpoint. In this case, select option D. Change the app registration to a multi-tenant supported account type and use the appropriate tenant-independent sign-in endpoint. This is correct because a multi-tenant application registration accepts organizational identities from other Microsoft intratenants, and the common or organization's endpoint supports cross-tenant sign-in. A. Device join is unrelated to application tenant availability. B. Identity protection evaluates risk, but does not make a single tenant app multi-tenant. C. Conditional access can control sign-in after the application supports the tenant. It does not change the app's audience. Exam tip. To enable direct cross-tenant sign-in, configure the app as multi-tenant. Use B2B governance when explicit guest lifecycle control is required. Let us focus on question number 268. Next, we enter the topic of semi-structured data. The central scenario is as follows. A company is moving an analytics data lake to Azure. Existing processing frameworks expect Hadoop-compatible hierarchical paths and HDFS semantics. Which storage service should be selected? The relevant choices are as follows. Now examine choice A, Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2. Now examine choice B, Azure NetApp Files. Now examine choice C, Azure Data Share. Now examine choice D, Azure Table Storage. The appropriate choice is option A, Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2. Here is the technical justification. ADLS Generation 2 adds a hierarchical namespace and Hadoop-compatible access to Azure Blob Storage, making it suitable for HDFS-oriented analytics frameworks. The remaining options are incorrect because B. Azure NetApp Files provides managed NFS and SMB volumes, not the blob-based Hadoop data lake requested. C. DataShare distributes datasets, but is not the primary storage platform. D. Table storage is a key-value NoSQL store without HDFS semantics. Remember this distinction for the exam. Hierarchical namespace plus blob scale is the defining ADLS Generation 2 combination. Let us examine question number 269. Begin by examining the scenario. A read-heavy application retrieves product data from Azure SQL database. During peak demand, repeated queries cause high latency, while short-lived staleness is acceptable. Which component should be added to reduce read latency and database load? Now examine the possible answers. Option A is Azure Cache for RedISS. Option B is Azure Content Delivery Network. Option C is Azure Data Factory. Option D is Azure Synapse Analytics. The best answer is option A, Azure Cache for RedISS. The reasoning is as follows. Azure Cache for RedISS stores frequently requested application data in memory, reducing database round trips and improving read latency. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. CDN caches web content at edge locations and is not a general database query cache. C. Data Factory orchestrates data movement and transformation. D. Synapse is an analytics platform, not a low-latency operational cache. Use a cache only when the application can define expiration and invalidation behavior. Proceed to question number 270. This question moves us into messaging architecture. Consider this scenario. Two services exchange related business messages through a queue. Messages that share the same order identifier must be processed in strict first-in, first-out order, even with multiple competing consumers. Which queue configuration should be used? Review the options. Choice A, Azure Queue Storage with custom metadata. Choice B, a partitioned service bus queue without sessions. Choice C, an Azure Service Bus queue with sessions enabled. Choice D, Azure Queue Storage with a stored access policy. The correct answer is option C, an Azure Service Bus queue with sessions enabled. The requirement is satisfied because Service Bus sessions group messages by session ID and provide ordered, exclusive processing for each related message stream. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A. Queue storage does not guarantee strict FIFO through custom metadata. B. Partitioning distributes load but does not by itself preserve ordered processing for related messages. D. A stored access policy governs SAS authorization and does not affect ordering. A useful examination rule is this. Service bus sessions are the standard answer for FIFO processing within a business entity or workflow. Question number 271. Scenario. An event-driven Azure function processes Event Hub's batches that can run for 5 to 20 minutes. The app must scale from incoming events and must not be constrained by the consumption plan's execution timeout. Which hosting plan should be recommended? Option A. A dedicated app service plan without autoscale. Option B. The classic consumption plan. Option C. An app service web app. Option D. An Azure Functions premium plan. The required response is option D, an Azure Functions premium plan. The premium plan provides event-driven scaling, pre-warmed instances, VNet support, and no fixed maximum execution timeout, making it suitable for long event processing functions. The alternatives can be eliminated because A. A dedicated plan can run long functions, but does not inherently provide the requested event-driven scale behavior. B. The classic consumption plan has a bounded function timeout that is too short for the maximum runtime. C. An app service web app is not a functions hosting plan for this event-triggered workload. The key takeaway is when event-triggered functions can exceed consumption timeouts. Premium is the usual managed scaling choice. Review question number 272. Carefully. This is a harder question, so check every requirement carefully. Begin by examining the scenario. A private HTTPS service has active deployments in 2 Azure regions. Each deployment sits behind a regional internal standard load balancer. The global entry service must health probe both regions, failover automatically, and reach the private origins over Microsoft Private Link. Which service should provide the global entry point? Compare the following options. Choice A, Azure Firewall Premium. Choice B, Azure Application Gateway v2. Choice C, Azure Cross-Region Load Balancer. Choice D, Azure Front Door Premium. The appropriate choice is option D, Azure Front Door Premium. The key reason is Azure Front Door Premium provides global Layer 7 routing and health-based failover and can connect privately to internal load balancer origins through Private Link. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Azure Firewall secures traffic, but is not a global application load balancer. B. Application Gateway is regional and cannot alone balance across regions. C. Cross-region load balancer uses public global front-end and regional public standard load balancers. It does not directly provide the stated private Layer 7 origin design. Keep this examination point in mind. For private multi-region HTTP origins, combine Front Door Premium with Private Link and regional internal load balancers. Question number 273. Now, a compliance archive contains less than 10 gigabytes of documents that are read every business day. Each object must be immutable for 5 years. After the retention period, an authorized process may delete the object, but it must never be modified. Complete the storage recommendation. The first statement reads, store the documents in the blank. Select from a general purpose v2 account with the hot blob tier, a general purpose v2 account with the cool blob tier, or a premium block blob account. The second statement reads, prevent modification and deletion during retention by configuring the blank. Select from a time-based immutable storage policy, a storage account resource lock, or anonymous container access. For Statement 1, select a general purpose v2 account with the hot blob tier. Hot minimizes access charges for data read every day. For Statement 2, select a time-based immutable storage policy. A time-based immutability policy enforces worm retention and permits deletion only after the retention interval expires. Exam tip. Resource locks protect management plane operations. Immutable storage enforces data plane worm retention. Now consider question number 274. The focus now shifts to managed identities. An ASP.NET Core application runs on an Azure VM with a system-assigned managed identity. It must obtain a token without storing credentials and use that token to read secrets from Azure Key Vault. Complete the token acquisition design. Review Statement 1. The non-interactive managed identity token exchange follows the OAuth 2.0 the blank. Choose between client credentials grant pattern, authorization code grant flow, or implicit grant flow. Review Statement 2. The application requests the token from the blank. Choose between Azure Instance Metadata Service Endpoint, Interactive Microsoft Identity Platform Authorization Endpoint, or Key Vault Secret Endpoint. Statement 1 should be completed with client credentials grant pattern. Managed identity authentication is a non-interactive application-to-service token exchange comparable to client credentials. Statement 2 should be completed with Azure Instance Metadata Service Endpoint. Azure Virtual Machines expose managed identity token acquisition through the Instance Metadata Service. Remember this distinction for the exam. Use IMDS or Azure Identity Libraries for VM managed identities. Never embed a client secret. Question number 275. Review the situation. A Synapse workspace must load lake data into persistent hash-distributed warehouse tables. Data engineers also need to create, query, and update Delta Lake tables with Spark APIs. Complete the pool selection. Statement 1. Load data into hash-distributed warehouse tables by using the blank. Select from a dedicated SQL pool, a serverless SQL pool, or an Apache Spark pool. Statement 2. Create and update Delta Lake tables by using the blank. Select from an Apache Spark pool, a dedicated SQL pool, or a serverless SQL pool. The answer to the first statement is a dedicated SQL pool. Dedicated SQL pools persist relational warehouse tables and support hash distribution. The answer to the second statement is an Apache Spark pool. Apache Spark pools support Delta Lake writes, updates, and Spark-based processing. Serverless SQL can query Delta data, but cannot perform Delta updates. Use Spark for Delta writes. Question number 276 highlights an important distinction. Focus on the following situation. A cloud governance team needs a monthly report showing Azure Resource Manager resource create and deployment operations in a subscription. Which data source should be queried? Focus on the distinction between these options. Option A, Azure Activity Log. Option B, Azure Arc. Option C, Azure Analysis Services. Option D, Azure Monitor Metrics. In this case, select option A, Azure Activity Log. This is correct because the activity log records subscription-level control plane events, including resource creation and deployment operations, and can be exported for longer retention and reporting. B. Azure Arc extends Azure management to external resources, but is not the deployment audit log. C. Analysis Services is a semantic modeling service. D. Metrics contain numeric time series measurements rather than a complete control plane operation history. A useful examination rule is this. Use the activity log for who did what control plane events. Use resource logs for service-specific data plane behavior. You have completed Part 6 of the AZ-305 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.